Welcome back, wannabes and creatives, to The Complete Creative, the podcast that helps you build and sustain a more successful and fulfilling creative business. Today on the show, we have a treat. Fredrik Haren is an international keynote speaker, best-selling author, and a self-proclaimed creativity explorer. He goes around the world interviewing creatives from all walks of life, from the head engineers at Ford all the way down to the children of prostitutes in the slums of Bombay, trying to find out what makes creativity and what makes everything unique and how to bring that back into our own lives. So it was wonderful to have him on. This one definitely focuses quite heavily on creativity and inspiration, and I'm really excited to have him on to talk about that. And we definitely talk about how to maintain your inspiration, how to get inspiration in this very difficult time. As you know, if you go to The Complete Creative, I have tons of books and courses and free courses and epic blog posts. I think the one that goes best with this episode is my ebook, How to Make the Best Work of Your Life. And you can get that for free at thecompletecreative.com/your-best-work. That's thecompletecreative.com/your-best-work. Hope you enjoyed this episode. And now, take it away, Fredrik. Tell us what you're passionate about these days.
What am I passionate about these days? Well, we're recording this in Corona times, so I'm passionate about thinking more reflectively about what I am doing and why I am doing it and how I should be doing it. I think this has been an amazing pause for people, and I'm also passionate to find out what how other people are reflecting about what they are. What I just interviewed the head of innovation of Ford cars, the head designer, and how he was reflecting about how will this change how people drive cars in the future. So I'm passionate about reflecting, I guess.
I love it. I mean, you bring up the time of Corona, and I try to let it flow freely if we go there, but not like push it. But I'm so interested to find out, how do you keep your creative spark going in this time? Because I feel like every time I get it lit again, it burns out.
Yeah. So I had this almost like epiphany a couple of days ago. Then because it's a global pandemic and they are not very common. So the last time we had it, this was 100 years ago. It was the Spanish flu. Tens of millions of people died. Theaters closed and people got sick and scared and everything. And on top of that, there was a world war going on as well. And that was 1918 to 1920 or something roughly like that. And that's where we are right now. We don't have the war, fortunately, but apart from that, that's where we are. And it created a lot of creativity, but it was more in survival mode and people had to do things differently because they were forced to. But what happened after that, right after that, as a direct effect of what the fact that we had the pandemic crisis? Well, what happened is the 1920s or the Roaring 20s. And that was, especially in the West, there was an explosion of human creativity from changing values, changing society, art, culture, jazz, everything just exploded. And people said, you know what? What we've been doing before, screw that. We're going to do something totally different. Let's have fun. And that was like a decade. After that, there was a world war. But for 10 years, there was this amazing creative period, which is the Roaring 20s. So I think that when we look back in history 50 years from now, we will not remember the 2020s as the Corona, the decade of the 2020s as the Corona time. We will remember it as the Roaring 2020s or the creative 2020s. Because if you look at it 100 years ago, there was so much built up demand, there was so much built up need to create and do something. And when we find, it's like living in winter for the longest time. When spring comes out, you just explode with joy. And I think that is going to happen. It doesn't feel like this at all right now for many people. And I feel I like to live a little bit into the future, and I'm already there.
You said so, it's so interesting because I was just listening to Jenny Odell talk about this on the Ezra Klein show this morning. How a lot of the time when she finds that she can't be creative, she's journaling or doing whatever, and she feels like the spark has burnt out. What ends up happening is those end up being the most important times. She was telling a story about how when she wrote a book and when she looked back at her journals, she saw all of these lines almost like exactly as she wrote them in the book, but in her journals during a time that she considered like a very dark time that like she couldn't get anything done.
Yes, and so I was try to explain creativity to when I do my creativity talks and speeches for companies and stuff. I like to explain that creativity is you need the inspiration part. Like everyone is a lot of people are focused very much on you need to be inspired to be creative. And yes, it's true, and we can talk about that later. I'm all for it, but creativity doesn't come when you are. It's not the inspiration. You need it to become creative, but creativity is so inspiration means to breathe in, right? You inspire like that. So inspiration literally means to breathe in. It's like oxygen to your creative forces. But to be creative is actually to breathe out. You're creating something. So and you cannot breathe out if you're breathing in. So we had more than a decade of economic global growth before this happened. And that was all this positive input coming in and opportunities and positivity and everything like that. We almost forgot what a crisis was. And now we go into more of a slower time not for everyone, but for a lot of people. But that's when we can stop and reflect about all the things that we were thinking about. Which of these projects, now I actually have time, what project should I actually be doing? So we need this, it's just like you need to breathe in and breathe out. We need to have the creative inspiration, positivity, and opportunities. And then you need to have this time to stop, reflect. And that, to me, that's the most important. I can't remember the last time I've been so creative.
You keep saying things that I've been thinking or that I keep saying, so I have to I have to highlight them because when people talk to me about writer's block or artist block, I say you've been breathing out for too long. You've been trying to create. You've been pushing forward on these projects, and you're not taking any input in. You're not refilling the creative tank, so to speak, to be able to breathe out again. So without having both pieces, the breathing out, without breathing in, you can't breathe out, and vice versa.
Yeah, I have a great story about that. So I interviewed a Thai paper artist. Her name is Kay, and she makes this beautiful, absolutely stunning pieces of art. She's not origami. She uses mostly scissors. She's cutting them up into beautiful flower patterns and everything. And we were talking about what we can learn about creativity from Thailand. And she was mentioning this Thai saying. It's sabai sabai. Do you know about sabai sabai?
I don't.
It's okay. So it's a very Thai thing, and it basically means like, don't worry, relax, it's going to be fine. So you walk into your bar in Thailand, and then say, I like a beer, and say, sorry, no beer today, and they're like, what? You don't have any beer? And say, oh, okay, sabai sabai, it's okay, it's going to be fine. I'll give you a vodka. So it's like that. It's very relaxed style, and that's Thai people are on average extremely happy people because they don't get so upset about things all the time. So, and he's talking about her creative process, and said, okay, so what do you do? Like, if you were talking about creative block, right? A writer's block. So I went, okay, so what do you do when you have when you get stuck in your work? And she just looked at me and go, like she truly didn't understand the question. And she said, I go out, I go to a cafe. And I said, okay, so what's in your head? My Western brain, like, okay, what's in your head? What are you thinking about? Like how to solve the problem? Or like, she was thinking I said, I'm thinking, what kind of coffee should I get? I said, okay. I said, so you're not thinking about the project? She goes, no, of course not. I'm leaving it on the table. I'm going out for a while. I'm leaving it. And then she goes have a coffee for an hour or something, talks to her friend, just leaves the project there. And then she comes back and she continues again. And we came up with the name Idea Nap, which I think is beautiful. So it's like power nap, but it's the opposite of writer's block. You are blocked, but you don't get upset about it. You just ignore it. You go out for a while, let it pass, and go back and continue. And that's what David Ogilvy did. And he would go and watch a movie in the middle of the day because he didn't have any ideas. But it's without all the drama, and all the stress, and all the anxiety. Why do we add all of that in the West? Just because right now we just need an idea nap.
So I often tell people that I don't work as hard as they think that I do, that I try and take 3 hours off a day in the middle of the day for that exact reason, because I think that deep work and thinking and thought about things that are not part of the project, it gets your whatever the processing part of your brain is. Like, the processing part of your brain is this amazing piece of construction that, like, it keeps going, the unconscious part, even while you're doing other stuff. And by doing that other stuff, you kind of like you're no longer running at peak efficiency, so it can like use the power that it has to do whatever it needs to do, so that when you come back to it, you're like, oh, I know exactly what to do now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I do that. From, if we're going to talk about creative process, I do that on the extreme, because I not only do that like I totally do like what you're doing during a 24-hour cycle, but I also do it on a 365-day cycle, like on a year. So I am all about, like I said, all about inspiration. Get as much different input as you possibly can. See as many different things as you possibly can. And so, as you might know, that I used to, before the crisis came, I used to travel like a maniac, because I wanted to see as much as possible of the world. I wanted to see, I want to go to North Korea. I want to go to the Maldives. I want to go to Sri Lanka. I want to go to Silicon Valley. I want to see all the different countries, different cultures, different people. And I just want to, because the more you see, the more different ideas of how you can do things do you get. Just overflow myself with inputs and inspiration. But I do that for about 8 to 10 months per year. And then for the rest of the year, 2 to 4 months, usually like 3 months per year, I don't do anything. So I have an island in Sweden, a private island, where we go for 2 months every year, and it's only us on the island. There's no one else there. And we take a rowing boat for like 300 meters away from land, and suddenly we are on this island. And we don't leave it. We only leave it to get the groceries. And we never go and meet any of my Swedish friends. If they want to come, they have to come to our island. Otherwise, screw them. We're just going to be on this island. And the only thing I do is play with my kids, teach them how to hammer and build stuff, and swim around the island, or look at the birds or whatever. And I hardly use the internet, hardly at all, for 2 months. And what happens in the brain? All those different things that I've been seeing and interviewing and meeting and discussing and exploring, and then suddenly my brain starts to connect those two. It's an absolutely fascinating process. The subconscious part of the brain is where all the fun stuff happens. You need to go there. You need to consciously create. I'm not saying everyone needs to travel around the world like crazy and go and sit on an island. I'm an introvert, so I don't, a lot of extroverts would go crazy on an island for 2 months without meeting people. But you need to figure out your own creative process to the exact, like, what is it that makes you creative, and then live a life according to that. And most people don't.
Absolutely. I think that's so true. I know that when I first started doing this, so this is my 5th year. I've been doing this since 2015 full time, right around June. So, or almost coming to my 5th year anniversary. And that first year, I was running so hard until about December. And then December hit, and I own a Verizon dealership, and like I do a lot of shows, and basically like all of my life shuts down in December. Like there's just no business, like there's nothing to do, and I had no choice but to take the entire month of December off. And I complained about it quite a bit while it was happening, but I realized that taking that stopping running and like staying still allowed me to process everything that had happened that year and plan for the next year. And suddenly all of the connections that I didn't have time to make because my brain was running and I was running at full speed, suddenly they started slamming into me at like once. And it gave me so many ideas for 2016 where I launched the first iteration of this podcast, and we redid our mascot and our branding, and all of this stuff happened that like catapulted me for an entire year forward. And then I did the same thing. I kind of ran until December and I stopped, and I was like, oh, well, what can we do now to like, and that gap of that month of December has become like a pretty sacred time for me. I'm not saying I don't do anything in December, because that would be crazy for me, at least, because I like doing a bunch of stuff. But I do maybe 5 to 10% of what I normally do, and it allows my brain time to process all of those inputs that I had over the year, all of those communications that I had with fans and friends, all of those projects that I worked on, and figure out what was working and what didn't work. And even though I try to take a lot of time off in the middle of the day to think, if I can, I'm not saying I do it every day, but as often as I can, it still takes until that having that long-term view of what happened and being able to analyze all of those inputs in the back of your brain. Honestly, like that December, I don't make hardly any money, but I make all of my money for the next year in that time as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that is a very good way of putting it. That's a good time to talk about Ideas Island, I'm guessing, because if you want to go, let me know. So for those people who don't know, so I said I live in Sweden 2 months per year, but I actually have 2 islands in Sweden, and the other one is I've renamed Ideas Island, and it's exactly about what you were talking about. So it's not about being away all the time, but it's an island with 7,000 square meters with one house on it, and you get access to that. You get access to that island for 1 week, Saturday to Saturday. You don't pay you don't pay any rent. You don't pay anything to stay. I don't make money on it. I lose money on it because I have to take care of the island. But the whole idea is to give away 1 week to some creative person anywhere in the world. So anyone listening, please apply. Please apply if you want, and because I want to give people the same experience. Because sitting by yourself, isolated on an island, just water around you, something happens in your brain, because you feel like the brain just says, okay, I'm all by myself right now. You feel isolated. So and it's amazing the kind of ideas that just happen when people just take a break from their normal everyday life and said, okay, you know what, I'm just going to go sit on an island for a week and just work on one creative project. And it's my I call it CSR, a corporate creativity project. It's like it's my gift to the world to let people stay on the island and work on an idea. So I like to share that with people.
That's wonderful. And how do you apply?
Ideasisland.com.
Awesome. And I think this is a good time. I always get so excited about the thing. I always forget to let the guests sort of introduce themselves. So while we're here and we've had a good spot for Ideas Island, why don't you take a second and sort of introduce yourself and what brings you to the show and your sort of your creative journey to here.
Yeah. Okay. So so I'm Fredrik Haren, and I'm the Creativity Explorer. That was a moniker given to me by my son. He was supposed to introduce me to his classmates. You know, what does your father do for a living? He was supposed to say, my father is a creativity expert, but he screwed it up. So he said, my father is a creativity explorer, and that's much, much better. So I've been a creativity explorer for 20 years. I basically write books and speak on the topic of creativity, and I do it all around the world, 70 countries, 6 continents, 25 to 35 countries per year. It's just my thing. I want to try and go around the world, meet as many creative people as I can, learn as much as possible about creativity, and then go and share my findings to people all around the world. So I'm very passionate about 2 things. I'm passionate about human creativity, and I'm passionate about humanity on a global level. So my inner theme is humanity to the power of ideas. So humanity to the power of ideas. It means I believe in the potential of humanity, and I believe in the power of human creativity. So that's kind of who I am. And my books, I self-publish them. I write them, I edit them, I decide what to write. I've written 10 books, and I'm writing 3 books right now. They're all on creativity. yeah, and then that's what I do. And then I run a pod, not a pod, I write a blog on professional speaking called professionalspeaking.com. And then as a find good ending, I have Ideas Island, as I just talked about, as a little CSR project to help other. Basically, it's all built on the idea of helping people become more creative, because I think the world would be a much better place if everyone learned to be more creative.
Absolutely. I agree. I have to ask, since we talked a little bit about coronavirus, how are you transitioning from your global speaking, which requires you to be somewhere usually, I would assume, now that like you can't travel as much or hold big events?
Yeah, so that that is true. So global conference speaker means that you travel around the world and speak at conferences. And the two things that really got canceled is global travel and big meetings with a lot of people in them. So yes, speakers were one of the speakers in Asia. I'm based in Singapore. I am Swedish, but I've been living in Asia for 15 years. Speaking in Asia was one of the industries that were hit first, and we got cancellations already way back in February. And it most likely will also be one of the industries that will be affected the longest, because as societies start to open up, they open up everything except big meetings with a bit large amount of people. So the global conference speaking industry died, along with a lot of other industries. The interesting thing, and I saw it coming early, because we live in Singapore, where it's been literally like living in a time machine. It's so weird. So, for example, Singapore has handled it very well. The people of Singapore, there's very little panic, or almost zero panic. But we did have one day in Singapore when people hoarded toilet paper. Literally a month after, people started hoarding toilet paper in Europe, and then a few weeks later, people started hoarding toilet paper in America. And it's always 1 month ahead, always. It's been the weirdest feeling. So I've spent a lot of time writing, because, as I said, I speak and I write. And as I also said, I take 2 months off, and usually I do that in the summer when my kids are off from school. The reason I have 2 months in the summer is because my kids are off, so I can travel around the world, and still I can because when the kids are out of school, if the day they are out of school until the day they start school, that's when we live in Sweden, and then I'm with them 24/7. Because I'm with them every day, all the time. So even if I go, like I've been counting on this, even if I go to 30 countries in 1 year, I still have more time with my kids than someone who works 9 to 5, has 4 weeks vacation, and never travels a day in his life. Because when I am off, I am off 100% for 2 months, and then, or 3 months actually. So like you, December. So what we decided to do, and because the kids have been homeschooled because of this crisis, we decided to kind of take this time earlier this year. So I have had a lot of time with my kids that I normally would have had in July and August, based on the insight that we will now have 2 months that will not so much will happen. So let's just take this time with the kids now, and then hopefully things kick off again. And that's exactly what happened last week. Suddenly the conference market came back. We don't need to talk so much about speaking, but the speaking market came back, and this time it's virtual. So for 2 months, companies could have done virtual speeches 2 months ago. They could have switched like this, but they didn't, because they were not ready. And it takes a while to transition from one idea to one way of doing something to another way of doing something. And it took about 2 months for the world. But I did 3 webinars, 3 virtual keynote speeches. I built a home studio in one of my houses here with a full setup with green screen and everything. And now I'm just switched. I do exactly what I used to do, except I'm speaking to a screen, and it works phenomenally well. It really works. The people are sitting in front of the computers, but they're watching a live speech. Instead of raising their hand, they're in the chat. And the clients are happy, the audience is happy, the speaker is happy, and I think virtual speeches are here. And we needed a virus to get people to realize that it actually works. And I will have to admit that I had not built a studio in my house earlier because I did not believe in virtual speeches. I didn't think it would be able to get the same kind of message across, or that there would be a market for it. But I was wrong, and I happily accepted the fact that I was wrong, and now I'm all for virtual speeches. When the world comes back and the airlines are flying again and people are having conferences, will this continue? Yeah, for some, and then hopefully people come back and start meeting, and we become more human and connected and everything. And then I will speak on the stages again.
So I had just run 3 virtual summits in the past month and a half, and it's been incredible to see people's adoption rate of virtual almost overnight. I've always told my sales reps that like it doesn't make sense to like bring people on webinars because there's just no adoption of it. And suddenly it's almost, I mean, overnight we went from like nobody, like very few people watching webinars and like doing video to almost every single person doing it. And to the point now that you mentioned virtual conferences, I work in conventions. Most of my life is spent in a convention hall selling books. And it's amazing to watch all of these virtual conventions pop up now, literally, as you mentioned, like 2 months after everything shut down.
But it took 2 months. And that's a very interesting observation about the time we need to change our ways. But I also have to say, this virus is a nasty virus. And I have some good friends who've been really sick. And I have a lot of friends who have lost a lot of friends who have lost someone that, lost a parent or something like that. I just like yesterday, a friend of my wife lost her other parent, and she lost 2 of her parents in a week, just like that. And the parents were not living where she was. She never had time from 2 parents to 0 parents in a week, and without being able to go and see them. That is terrible. This is a nasty virus. But there's one thing you have to give the credit to the virus for, and that is having perfect timing. Because imagine if this would have happened 10 years ago. No one was mentally ready to start doing these Zoom calls or virtual seminars. The technology wasn't there. The people weren't there. We would have just been sitting at home going crazy. But now, right now, the whole technology was there. So, okay, we're ready. We can do that. We can do a lockdown, and we can continue to work, and we are.
Yeah, I often think if part of the reason why we were so okay with going with doing it, is it because it's now, or is it just that the virus had impeccable timing? I'm not quite sure which it is. If it's just like, if this had happened 10 years ago, would we have also gone on lockdown, or would we have been much more reticent to do so? Or is it just like that? Like it happened 100 years after it happened before, and we just like lucked out that now we happen to have all the technology.
Yeah, because I live in Asia. It did happen 10 years ago. It was called SARS, and it hit Singapore badly, and the economy was hit. Then it was bad, but it didn't become a global thing. And at that time, people were not able to just transition mentally, because it's not only that it's technologically possible to now do a lot of things. Like I mentioned, I interviewed the head of design of Ford, and they literally they bought the 3D CAM equipment to all the designers to ship to their homes. So now they can sit at home and in group collaboration work on the latest car models by having VR. They could have bought that before Corona hit. They just didn't. They thought, oh, we have to drive to office, we have to sit there, we have to work on it together. And they thought, you know what, actually we don't. So we not only is the technology there, but our mindset around using the technology was also ready. So they needed this to push them to say, you know what, maybe we can have this technology at home. And he said, that's the best decision we've ever done. When this is over, he said, I'm not going to go to work every day. I have so much time with my kids now, because I save 1.5 hour commute every day that I can spend with my kids instead of in my car. And I'm going to continue to work from home, not every day, but like 2 or 3 days per week. But why didn't he do that before? Because he wasn't mentally ready for it. So the timing is impeccable. Thank you, coronavirus, for waiting.
Yes, for waiting. And so you have a pretty amazing blog that I've been running through kind of obsessively over the past work. You didn't talk about the world of creativity part of the blog that you have. You talked about the global speaking one, but I'm really excited for the world of creativity part of this, because you basically like roam around the world and interview creative people on this blog, right?
Mm. Yeah, yes, that is great. I didn't know if it was appropriate to talk about my blog on your podcast, so I kind of skipped that. But yes, it's one of my most fun projects. I just rebranded it though. It's now called the Creativity Explorer. It's the world of creativity with the Creativity Explorer. I'm using both names. I love both of them, but I think of it more as the Creativity Explorer blog. But yes.
Awesome. So this is great because one of the things that I love is sociological data, and you basically are a little sociological data experiment. And you've pulled like this data of like what it's like to be creative all around the world. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about what sort of pieces of creativity transcend like location and like that you found just are ubiquitous for anywhere you've been in the world.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. And yes, so the whole idea for the Creativity Explorer moniker and the whole idea of doing that is to kind of go and to explore literally means to venture into unknown territory in order to learn more about something. And so I venture into unknown territory around the world of creativity in order to learn more about it. And the reason I do that is because when it comes to creativity, we've studied Silicon Valley until we're blue in our faces, and we study a lot of authors and dancers and like traditional creative occupations. And that's great. Those are amazing creative jobs. But on the other hand, I've met some extremely uncreative musicians or actors, and so it's not a direct correlation between some industries and creativity. And on the other hand, you can go into the most unexpected industries and find super duper creative people in those. So it's kind of like a map. We have mapped some part of the creative landscape to death, and then there's huge aspects of the world of the creative world that we haven't studied at all. So I thought, you know what, let's go and study that. So I've gone to like the slums of the slums of Manila, or I interviewed people who the worst living conditions I've ever seen in my life. People living literally not on top. It is a former. It's not a former. It is a dump site for trash, and they live on the part of the dump site where they burn the trash to create coal, so they can sell the coal, and everything is black. You can't even imagine. And I go in there and I interviewed them about how they look at creativity. I went to the slums of Mumbai, interviewed the children of sex workers in Mumbai. What can we learn about creativity from the children of sex workers in Mumbai? I went to North Korea. What can we learn about creativity from the North Koreans? So I'm much more, but also like a Thai paper artist, or because we don't know enough about Thai creativity. And I'm actually looking for the opposite. I'm not looking for what makes everyone human creativity similar across the board. I'm looking at what makes creativity different, so that we can see different aspects of creativity. I look at it like food. Like Anthony Bourdain, going around the world to learn about how food is different, and by doing that, realizing that we're all the same. So I go around and say, okay, so how is creativity different all around the world, and what can we learn from that? So now you can go, okay, so today I think I'm going to use a little bit more of the Thai approach. I'm just going to be more relaxed today. And tomorrow I'm going to use the North Korean approach, and so on. But to answer your question, what is similar? I want to use North Korea as an example, because I have this exercise that I do sometimes in workshops. And it goes like this: use your imagination and say something that's impossible. Use your imagination and say something that's impossible. And then I have the group say 10 things. So, and people, there's literally a 1 trillion things you could say. You could say it's impossible for 2 pens to right now fly up with rockets in their head, mate in midair, fly into your nose and smoke. You could say that it's impossible, right? But the funny thing is, when you do this exercise, every single group says more or less the same thing, which is it's impossible, teleportation, come back from the dead, walk on water. There's 10 answers that always come. So when I do the exercise, I write beforehand. I write down these 10 answers on a flip chart, and then I ask them to say 10, and I write them down on a flip chart. And when they're done with their 10, I show my 10. And I always, every single time, I've done this more than 1,000 times, every single time except once, I have more than 50% of what they wrote on my flip chart. And that is just to show that even if you give the most creative problem in the world, use your imagination and say something that's impossible, you can literally say anything. Even when you do that, people always default go to the same answers. And that happens, doesn't matter which country I go to. So finally, I get to go to North Korea, a country that's totally isolated from the rest of the world. They don't even have internet. They have their own internet that only works in North Korea. They're not allowed to travel. They are literally living on another planet. And it's like going back in time 50, 60, 100 years. And I go there and I do the exercise with them. I say, use your imagination, say something that's impossible. And I'm say, finally, I'm going to get different answers. And I have 6 out of 10 on my list. Wow. Just like everyone else. So my lesson is that, first of all, North Koreans are much more similar to us than we think they are. And two, this is a human phenomenon. We fall into the trap of coming up with the same ideas that everyone else does. And that's why it's so important never to write down 10 ideas and pick one, because you're just writing down obvious ideas. You need to come up with 20, 30, 50 ideas and then pick one, because then it's a much bigger chance that you actually come up with something that is unique.
All right. You mentioned one thing I think that you're going to say, but I would love to know how else we can break out of that habit of living in this sort of creative bubble, or this creative of not looking outside or saying enough ideas, or what can we do to break the habit that humans have?
Well, the most important thing is to be aware of it, because just by being aware of it, it's like an allergy. If you know you're allergic to nuts, you avoid nuts and life is better. If you know that the first 10 ideas you have are not ideas, I call them ideations. It's like it's not information, it's not ideas, it's like somewhere in between. But they can feel like an idea. It's like blank bullets. It's the same feeling as having an idea, but they are not, we shouldn't even call them ideas. That's why I call them ideations. If you are aware of this, the first 10 ideas you don't count as ideas. You just write them down. You write them up, you throw them away, and you say, okay, thanks enough. It's like when it's like cutting off the crust or whatever on something. The first thing that comes out of when wineries switch wines, the first wine that comes out, they just look at it and throw it away, and then they start putting it on bottles. So just being aware of it is the biggest thing, and most people are not aware of it. Most people are not. So I think that's the biggest insight. And then, of course, writing them down. My book, the idea book, is 50% book, 50% notebook. And the reason I did it like that is because I want people to write down their ideas, because then writing these first ideas down might trigger a better idea later. So they're not meaningless, those first 10. They might lead you somewhere, but it's like a stepping stone to the good ideas. So we need to go through this phase.
Awesome. I really want to find out what are the coolest things that you learned about creativity from being around the world. Like what are either the most unique or just like the best tips that you learned from like Thailand or North Korea, or like not what makes us the same, but now like I'd like you to be like, what makes it different, and what have you brought back into your own life that's really been effective for your own creativity?
Okay, I actually knew that's what I find so fascinating with this topic. Maybe it's because it's something that I am passionate about, and therefore I find everything interesting. But I literally, for every single interview I do, I find something absolutely fascinating. So
I have a list of some of them that you found, because you're actually very good at taking the distilling the interview down to like one moment. So a couple of the ones that were recent, I'd love you to talk about this, because talk about impossible. The first one that I remember, you had 2 in a row, and one said live in the present, and the next one literally said live in imaginary worlds. And those feel like diametrically opposed things. How can you do both of those things?
All right, so I'll share one that I haven't published, because I think that's more fun for your listeners. And this is, oh God, now it's early in the morning here in Singapore. Please forgive me, I don't remember. I am terrible with names. I don't remember his name, but he's a Swiss watch designer. and I will. We can put it in the show notes if you have show notes. I'll find a name and we'll. So he's a Swiss. He has his own Swiss company, and he used to work for the big ones for like 50, and he would work 15, 20 hours per day doing great Swiss watch work. And then he quit, started his own company, and he went into this phase where he would sleep 15 hours per day for months because he was sleep deprived. He'd been working. He's been so passionate about working with watches that he's worked all the time. He didn't sleep. And then when he finally started his own company, his body just said, you know what? Pause. And he did. So he slept 15 hours per day, which is a lot. And for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then when he woke up, he had this thing where he started to watch sci-fi movies. Like, I think it wasn't Star Trek, but something like that. And he would watch 3 or 4 episodes in a row. So he was only awake for like 6-7 hours per day. But out of those 3-4 hours, he would watch sci-fi. So weird life. And then he did this. And then he had a dream, and it was a dream about a watch that he should create, which was absolutely, it looks like a spaceship because he was so much into space. And he was able, because he was living in dreamland, he was able to go back into this dreamland over and over. So he started building this watch that looks like nothing else. It's like a dome. It's a glass dome sticking up, and the mechanism is floating inside this dome. Instead of being 2-dimensional, it's 3-dimensional. It's absolutely stunning. And when they were building it, they ran into problems, and he said, you know what? How do I solve this? And I said, oh, no, I'll go back and I will go back into my dream. So the next day, he could go back to the same dream over and over and over again to figure out, oh, it should be 43 cogs. Okay. And then he went back and continued, and it should be 43 cogs. He was literally going into this space. And my best idea I've ever had in my life, I came just like that too, in a dream in Thailand. I woke up at 2 a.m. and I had just dreamt this most amazing world that I turned into a novel. And I could go back into that dream too, like in different times. And that connects me, sorry if this is a long answer, but I think it's fascinating. When 10 years ago, I went and studied Buddhism with a Buddhist monk in Sri Lanka. And he was not part of any temple or anything because he didn't believe in that. So he was living by himself in a hut outside a temple. It was only him. And he's been there for decades. And you go there and you do nothing. You just meditate from 5 in the morning to 11 in the evening, and you don't talk. You're not allowed to talk for 11 days. Silent meditation. The only time you get to talk is for 5 to 10 minutes every day with the monk in the morning. So you can report your progress. And after that, you're silent and you meditate. It's a very weird feeling. It's wonderful. So one of the questions I asked this monk was, because he said, live in the present. Right? That was his message. Be here and now. So I challenged that because I said to him, you know what? Creativity is being in the future. You imagine a new future, right? So how can and that's an amazing feeling. So you're telling me I shouldn't be creative? He goes, yes, you should live in the moment. And I said, no, wait a minute. How about like Tiger Woods? Like he looks when he's doing a putt, he's looking at and he's imagining how the putt will, how the ball will go into the hole 10 times. He's living in the future. And then he goes back to the present, and then he does. Isn't that a good tactic? He goes, no. Okay, but how about my speeches? I'm doing my speeches. I'm rehearsing my speech. I need to remember what I'm going to say. Are you telling me I shouldn't rehearse my speech? He goes, yeah, you should not rehearse your speech. You should always be in the moment. I go, what the hell? And then he says this, Fredrik, what do you think would happen if Tiger Woods was just 100% present when he did that putt and not thinking about what he used to think that this would be like? Because maybe the weather is different now than when he was rehearsing it. Or maybe the crowd is bigger than he thought. So it's different than what he rehearsed. Why should he try to remember an image from before instead of just being him and the ball and the hole and nothing else exists in the world? And what if you go up on the stage and all you do is focus on being right there, right now, with the audience and tell the audience what they need to hear in this moment, not what you thought they should hear, but what they actually should be hearing based on the energy in the room. And I go, you're absolutely right. And then I interviewed a designer just last week. Again, I'm terrible with names, but he used to be the head designer of Nike, and he did the Jordan shoes and everything. And we had the discussion with him, and he said that he had this problem. He always lives in the future. As a designer, you live in the future. What kind of shoes do people want to buy 10 months from now? Because that's where he needs to live, and that's where he's happy. And he shared this story about how he goes into a cafe, and he gets all annoyed because the lighting is wrong. And his wife would tell him off, like, stop, you're redesigning the cafe, aren't you? And he goes, yes, it's terrible. They should change the lighting. They have different light bulbs. So he's like living in the future of what the cafe should look like, which is creativity, make the cafe better. But he's miserable because he can't enjoy the cafe right now. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does.
And then we came to this realization. So you asked me, like, the realization was that to come to peace with this, creative people need to find the balance. We need to be able to live in the moment right now, because that's when the best ideas happen. Study Nobel Prize winners. All the best ideas happen when people are totally in the moment. And at the same time, we need to be happy living in the future. So how do you do that? And what we came up with was this. You need to be accept the moment. So that's what we say, accept the present moment. But so we changed it from accept the present moment, we changed it to accept the possibilities of the present moment. Because then this designer can live, he can live in a world where he goes into a cafe and sees that it's wrong, but he can now accept the possibilities of what is wrong in this cafe and be at peace with the fact that it's not perfect now, but he can see the possibilities of how it could become perfect in the future. And now you're balancing present moment and future improvements. And I think that's a very good approach to creative people who sometimes feel miserable because the world is not the way they want it. And that we need to keep feeling like that, because otherwise we get complacency, and that's the opposite of creativity.
I love it. Well, we're near the end of our hour, unbelievably, but I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit more and leave people with, like, sort of the place you want to send them. So this could be your blog or book or whatever you're up to now that, like, lights you up and you think that people should go check it out.
Well, I think they should Google the idea book and they should buy the idea book. Now I know you're very much into books and publishing and stuff like this, and this is my book, my bestseller. It's self-published. It's 250,000 copies, more than 200,000 copies sold, 17 languages, and it's done that because I didn't sell it as a book. I sold this as a book. I sold it, and it's a book and a notebook. So it's 50% is book, how can you become more creative, and 50% is notebook, where you're supposed to write down your ideas. And the cover is like, it doesn't look like a book cover. It looks like a notebook, because it is a notebook, and it's not my idea book, it's your idea book. And then you write down your ideas in this book, and it's like an idea journal, and it becomes this companion for creative people. And so I would highly recommend you get that, and that's the best way. And then they want to Google me, just Google Fredrik Haren, there's only one in the world, or Google the Creativity Explorer, or go to theworldofcreativity.com.
Awesome. I love it. Okay. So this is the last question. So everyone who's been driving or working at their drafting table, just come back for a couple minutes. And I want Fredrik to deliver his last piece, the parting piece of advice that he wants us to all leave this podcast with, and then we'll say goodbye.
Oh, that was a hard one. That's like pressure. You know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say continue listening to this podcast. That's what I'm going to say. Because it's nothing more important than learning about creativity. And to do that in an inspiring way. My father was a music teacher, and he was a teacher and a musician, and one of the things he taught was music. And he said, you can turn anyone you can teach anyone to play an instrument. Like, I can take any child, I can teach him how to play the guitar. You put your fingers here, hit the chords, blah, blah, blah. But the only way you can turn someone into a musician is through inspiration. You need to inspire them to love music, and then they will figure out the chords. And even if they don't figure out the chords, they can still become great musician. Like Mick Jagger is not a perfect singer, but he is a great singer, even if it doesn't hit every note on the and you can be perfect pitch and sing beautifully, but you don't make it because you're just a robot. And I think this is absolutely true for creativity. You can teach people creativity techniques until you're blue in the face, but the only way that someone becomes a true creative is through inspiration. And creative inspiration comes from listening to other people, other creative people, about how they approach life. Because that way you get the tools sometimes, and even if you don't get the tools, at least you get the inspiration.
I love it. Thank you so much for stopping by, Fredrik.
Thank you. I enjoyed it a lot.
So that was Fredrik Haren. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I know I did. If you did, please go check out his book, his blog, and let him know how much you appreciated it. And if you like this episode, I do think it pairs very nicely with my ebook, How to Make the Best Work of Your Life, which you can get for free at thecompletecreative.com/yourbestwork. That's it for me. If you like this show, please rate, review, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you next time.